Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope that you're all really, really well. My name is Niamh Purcell, as Katie said, and I am a 17-year-old climate activist from County Waterford. I'm really happy to be here today, and I hope that you're all enjoying the conference as much as I am. So I have been an activist for almost 4 years here in Ireland, and my journey began when I started working with the Irish Schools Sustainability Network when I was 14. So my background is largely in climate education and working with students and schools on the ground in terms of how they can kind of make their schools more sustainable and how students can also be working together better to, work for their future and have a better future. So later in 2022, I became a young advisor for Ireland's Children and Young People's Assembly on biodiversity loss. And that's what my presentation is largely going to be centered around. So you'll be hearing an awful lot more about that later. I've spoken at a number of conferences, including giving keynote addresses at the Oireachtas, which I was very lucky to do, Dublin City University, and most recently, University College Cork's International Conference on Youth Climate Justice with the EPA. It's absolutely fantastic. A lot of my work centers around working with children in group settings regularly through running climate anxiety and empowerment workshops, empowerment being the key word there, in primary schools and speaking at conferences like these ones today. I've also completed online courses on how climate change impacts on and impedes on international human rights law, and how our young people are becoming leaders and creating new trends in the climate activism space, which is really important. My core values as an activist are empowering and inspiring young people to speak out for more meaningful climate action and improving climate equity and justice. So before I begin, there are just 4 things I'd like everyone to keep in mind today throughout the presentation. The first is that the effects of climate change are undeniably not felt equally throughout the world. The global south, i.e. developing regions, are feeling the worst effects of climate change. The second thing is that it is unfortunately developed regions, such as European countries and America, who are causing the current trajectory of climate change that we're seeing. But there is plenty that we can do, young people included, and young people are a crucial part to finding and implementing solutions to climate change. So, democracy. What is democracy? You may know that Ireland is a democratic state. This basically means that everyone gets a say and everyone's voice is heard, and not only heard, but counted for in decision making. This is why we have general elections and referendums. In a democratic state, everyone has their say. However, young people are often not included in this because the voting age is capped at 18, like Aoife was saying earlier. And a concerning consequence of that is that a large proportion of our global demographic, i.e. all the people in the world, such as our young people, are being ignored. And how can that be right when it is today's young people who will have to live with the worst impact of climate change in the future? However, a very positive development that we're seeing at the moment is that the voice of young people is not actually only being heard more, but asked for by governments and global bodies. And we can see this through the consideration of the voting age being lowered, even though there's not a lot of movement there, but hopefully one of these days it might happen. Children and young people are making major appearances in a newer process called deliberative democracy, which is what the assembly I was involved in was centered around. Many assemblies, like the assembly I was involved in, implement deliberative democracy from beginning to end. And because of that, citizens' assembly are becoming much more common in recent years. So just to tell you what citizens' assemblies are before I go into deliberative democracy, citizens' assemblies are randomly selected citizens of a state selected to come together to discuss a particular issue in society. And this can be any issue from housing to climate and biodiversity to education. And then those very same assembly members make recommendations to people in power about what they think needs to be done to address this issue. So it kind of represents what society thinks should be done. Deliberative democracy itself centers around 3 main principles. The first of which is information, where the assembly members are supplied with information about the issue, and this is lots of different types of information. So it could be written stuff, it could be reading things, it could be videos, like the ones that we've seen today. The second stage is then discussion, where the assembly members discuss and debate this information, and they form collective opinions and they share their own perspectives, which is key to deliberative democracy actually working. And then the third stage is decision making, where assembly members then come together and come up with recommendations or calls to action to submit to influential groups or people about how we can address the issue at hand. Youth citizens' assemblies are also becoming much more common, I'm very happy to say, and one even happened here in Ireland, which I was lucky enough to be involved in. So, In 2022, Ireland's first ever Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss took place. And the key thing to note is that this assembly was actually commissioned by the Irish government. You did hear me right. The Irish government actually asked to hear the voice of young people, which is certainly something to celebrate. And we are seeing this happening more and more around the world, which is such a positive thing. As part of the assembly, there was also a team of 9 young advisors, and this meant that these young advisors helped to design and run the assembly itself when it was happening. And they also worked with a team of adults. This process is called intergenerational design, where children and adults work together, and it really does work so well. It's so important, and I really hope that we'll be seeing more of it in years to come. I myself was lucky enough to become one of these young advisors when I was 15, and it was such a life-changing experience. So, what happened during our assembly? Well, over 2 weekends in October 2022, 35 randomly selected children and young people from all over Ireland, aged as young as 7 up to the age of 17, came together to talk about biodiversity loss in Ireland. We made recommendations to the Irish government then on protecting Irish biodiversity after following all those principles of deliberative democracy. And yeah, there they are, 3 stages: information, discussion, and decision making. And then we were visited by Minister Malcolm Noonan, who is Minister of State in Ireland for Electoral Reform and Heritage, at the end of the second weekend, where we presented our calls to action to him personally. We submitted our calls to action to the Government of Ireland as a whole in December 2022, and they were then released to the public in April 2023. But our impact actually didn't stop there. Shortly after our own assembly, some of our members presented our call to action to the Adult Citizens Assembly on Biodiversity Loss, which ran at the same time as our own. And one of their recommendations to the Irish government, one of the adults' recommendations to the Irish government, was for the Youth Assembly to be taken into account. That was massive for us because it shows that our voice was actually being listened to, and it kind of carried a lot of weight for the Irish government that the Adults Assembly were making this point that we had done such good work that we should be listened to and taken into account. And we were, which you will see a little bit later. In November 2023, I myself was lucky enough to co-facilitate a meeting alongside of our assembly members with the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Change and Biodiversity Loss, where we presented many of the recommendations that we made to politicians, and they actually listened to us. This became really clear when many of our calls to action could be found in Ireland's newest National Biodiversity Action Plan. And for those of you who haven't heard of that, it's a big set of guidelines here in Ireland that kind of talk about how we can be protecting Irish biodiversity, and more importantly, what the government is going to do to protect Irish biodiversity. So for our recommendations to be included in that was really a big deal to us. We were so happy. So what did the Assembly teach me as an activist? There were 3 main things, and the first of which is children are effective as leaders, very effective as leaders. And intergenerational design, which means including children from beginning to end, works very well. It works so well because children kind of relate to children an awful lot better. You know yourself, kind of easy to talk to your friends than it might be to talk to an adult. So including children in the design process and having them help run the assembly was really important to make it more relatable and more fun. The second thing that I learned was that, of course, young people are absolute powerhouses when it comes to making change, and I'll speak about this a lot more later. And the third thing is that a completely child's rights-based approach is needed in any project that is aimed at young people. And so we come to my favorite document of all time, as Aoife was talking about earlier, the UNCRC. So firstly, what does the UNCRC stand for? UNCRC means the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and it sets out every right that children are entitled to. To be clear, rights are something that we, as people, are given at the moment we're born because we are human beings. We do not have to work for them. There's nothing that we have to do to earn these rights, and they cannot be taken away. There are 3 rights in the UNCRC that are really important to climate justice and to me as an activist. So the first one is Article 4, which is making rights real. This means that children's rights do not only exist on paper, but must be cared for in everyday life, and they must be seen and evident in everyday life. Children must be able to see their rights being implemented and upheld, and more importantly, their opinions being implemented and upheld. Article 12, respect for children's views, means that children and young people not only have the right to have their voices and opinions heard, but implemented. And I know that Eva mentioned earlier the term due weight, which means, when people are listening to your opinions, it's not just tokenistic where you're saying it and it's kind of ticking a box, say that you've been listened to. What you are saying actually has to be given weight. Something actually has to be done about that. A thing that we see a lot surrounding the voice of young people is tokenistic implementation, where children are asked for their opinions, but those opinions are then ignored. The UNCRC actually prohibits that from happening through this right. And then Article 24, the right to health, water, food, and environment. The UNCRC actually made a right that means that children are entitled to a healthy environment. And this is really, really important in the climate justice space and in climate litigation, because that right is there. That means that we are able to fight for that through law systems and in our societies. So the rights of our people as a whole, but of our young people in particular, are so important. One thing that I always discuss when talking about the voice of young people is the stigma that I personally feel is attached to listening to that voice. And it's really important that people know about that. From my own personal experience and observation, and I'm sure many young people here today would agree, I think that some adults feel that children and young people don't actually deserve a seat at the tables that discuss social issues as big as this. They may think that because we're young, we're inexperienced, so how could we possibly know what we're talking about? I feel that a lot of the time, older generations think that social issues like climate change are somehow beyond the scope of our understanding because we're so young, but they really aren't. See, our young people do understand these issues, and what's more, they care. And our rights clearly state that we should be given a seat at the tables that discuss our future. Let me just repeat that, our future. This fact needs to be recognized in every conversation of this nature that we have in the climate justice space. It's our future, the future of young people that we're talking about here. So don't all the world's young people actually deserve a say in what that future is going to look like? So we come to my favorite and quite possibly the longest part of any presentation that I give. Empowerment. So I've kind of split this into 3 sections, and I'd like to speak just to the adults here today first, so if you could all just kind of listen up. Please keep in mind, you adults, that any young person you ever look at is a representation of the future. When you look at us, you look at the future. And our future, quite frankly, is looking quite bleak. So you can help us to fight for better. And that's what we really need right now. We need more adults that are willing to listen to us, to uphold our rights, to implement our opinions, and to make us feel valued. Because our voice is so important, and it's up to adults to kind of spread that throughout the world and say, well, actually, we should be listening to our young people. So coming kind of off of that and into my next point, our assembly would not have worked without adults that were willing to fully listen to and care about the voice of young people. The climate space itself needs to be safe and inclusive, with each young person listening to each other and helping each other. But the adults in the space also need to engage in that kind of healthy practice. The adults need to fully recognize the need for the voice of children. The adults need to be willing to fight for the youth that they work with when the youth can't do it themselves. The adults need to realize that they're not just fighting for their own future, but for the generation that comes after them. The adults need to bring those UNCRC principles, Article 4, Article 12, and Article 24, into everything that they do. They need to make sure that the youth that they work with feel supported enough to shout out what they want to see change without fear of being dismissed or shunned. I would ask everyone here today to focus on trying to become that type of adult who listens, who supports, and who cares. So to the young people here today, the most important part of today's conference, I just want to say to each of you that you matter. And I'm sure that you've heard this before, but I really do mean it. Your voices and your opinions matter. You are important, each and every one of you. Each of you have ideas and a unique perspective that is crucial to stopping climate change. Please remember, it's not the case that the voice of young people should be included in decision making. It must be. It must be included. Your rights state that, and you can use those rights to make sure that your voices are heard. You can make change, and don't listen to anyone who tells you you can't. You can. Our assembly did it, and you can do it too. Call for change, send letters to politicians, join a Green Schools committee, do those small things at home that we know will help, and don't underestimate the power of a good conversation about climate change. You never know how much your perspective can help someone else, and I know that each and every one of you has the power to be a leader. Remember that it's okay to feel alone, but recognize that you're not alone. There is a global community of climate activists all across the world fighting for change. Trust me, you're definitely not alone. I used to feel that way, like I was too small and insignificant to make change, but that simply wasn't true. And the assembly in particular really helped me. So I would absolutely encourage every young person here to get involved like projects like that. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there because your voice, it's more than just valid, it's a crucial part to the solution. And most importantly, don't give up. Keep fighting and remember that you really do matter. I'm not just saying that as a young person who's been on the side of feeling powerless and then equally on the side of making change, you really do matter. And then my final point to everyone here today, children and adults alike, let's just give ourselves permission to feel. Climate change is not just about the science or the action that we take, even though those things really are important. It also has a huge impact on how we feel. I personally think that often, and adults especially, feel that they need to have all the answers, and that being angry or confused or even scared is a weakness in the face of this crisis. But it's really not. Those feelings are there for a reason and they're trying to tell us something. We don't need to push them away or ignore them because they can be what binds us and helps us work together for a better future. It is absolutely okay to be vulnerable in the face of this crisis because we're all only human. We don't need to have all the answers, but we can work together to find them. Those feelings that we have are a place of common ground and they can help us to become closer to each other. They might actually be our greatest weapon, and I personally believe that they will be. So please give yourself permission to feel and spread that message to others around you. Fear and anxiety is not only okay, it can also be our reason for taking action and for fighting for a better world, both for the people that we know and for the people we don't. So let's make a better world together for everyone in it, not just for ourselves, but also for the people who need us to stand up for them the most. Thank you.